the function of any kind of non-violent posture is to threefold. So think about it from the context of Jeff Thompson's fence. Three functions of the fence. The first function is to maintain proxemics, which means the gap between you both. If there's some kind of verbal interaction, as people amp up, they move forward, right? So it's very important that you control momentarily your personal space, or this gap, right, between you both. You might say, look, mate, just calm down. What is it you need as you're talking, particularly if you're trying to de-escalate? Well, that position or platform that you're employing needs to be unobtrusive, non-aggressive, non-violent looking. But look at it from a tactical perspective, right? What's a major pre-threat cue? Somebody's fucking amping up, pulling, they're pointing, they're animated, they're beckoning, and all of a sudden they shift body weight. Well, if it's done very gross motor, he's a fucking amateur, but no less dangerous. If he does it really deceptive as he takes your attention, he knows what he's doing. But understand that this shift, or this definitive shift in body weight, is a precursor to him taking your fucking head off. What you'll notice straight away is on this person's approach, if I put up my hands, I'm straight away taking a step back and putting up my hands and going wide-eyed and talking to him. So I'm immediately bladed, which presents less thoroughfare for him to kick me directly in the balls because I'm bladed. And I'm also straight away shifted weight without him seeing it. So from this perspective, feet are one boot length apart. You're not standing on line, because if he pushes me, I'm back on my heels. I'm taking one boot back to the length of literally one boot. So the tips of this toe is in line with this heel. It's not a big exaggerated stance that you'd have if you were boxing, because they'll fucking see that. So it's literally a bladed position, one boot length, which is what the person will seek when they shift weight. But the second he approaches me, what I've got to do is pivot and put up my hands. I'm already shifted in weight without him seeing. So from a low line perspective, I'm bladed, no thoroughfare to the groin, and I'm balanced, which means I can move forward or I can move back. Or if I sustain impact, rather than go past the plane of my hips and down, I can actually default effectively from a bladed position because I'm braced. Right? Hand position would be, so understand that there's two ranges inside of a street conflict, and that would be conversation range, where we meet and greet, arm's length or just slightly less than 2 feet. That's primarily where this fence structure belongs. Or if it's becoming heated, animated, we're confined by space, or we're crowded, or the environment is very noisy, the situation will be very close in your face. So my natural position of preparation from arm's length would be hands here available. I like to keep my hands available. I don't make this staggered position unless I have to. So I might intermittently use my hands here as I'm communicating and I'm controlling this measure. So the first thing the fence will give you is momentary control of proxemics and space between you both. So one of the functions of the fence, it momentarily controls gap. Right? The second is it acts as a sensory antenna, which means if he's staying here while we're communicating and he's not touching this, I know that I'm not in any imminent danger until he does something else. But if he's stepping forward and I'm forced to put my hand on him and step back, incidentally, if you touch somebody, don't keep your hand on them. Touching people fucking winds them up. Right? So literally if he steps forward, I'll keep a measure and I'll take a little step back if I could, but I'll take my hand off him as soon as possible, right? Because if I put my hand on him in some way, he'll realise I've got control, and now I'll create a power play. If he knows I've got control, he'll fucking fight me for control. So I want to control this space without him really being cognitively or consciously aware that I'm in control. Does that make sense? On an innate level, he'll know that there's a barrier between us, but because I'm going wide-eyed and I'm turning my hands over and I'm moving my hands intermittently, everything about this barrier says I'm not a threat. If he is switched on and he's got savvy, or if you're not as, let's say, you should be very in a position with this where you can do this without him realising. But if you're not seasoned and you're relatively new to this, you quite often see people doing this. It looks very static. And now we'll be consciously, cognitively aware of it, in which case he might try to remove it quickly. But on the whole, I want to control space without him realising that I am. So if there's a verbal interaction between you both, get used to what South Narc calls talking Italian. Well, mate, I ain't got no problem with you. Just be cool. Leave me alone, man. I don't want no trouble, right? So straight away, I'm getting him familiar with I talk with my hands, much like anyone Latin would. Now, if he says something to you, such as, put your fucking hands down, what you got your hands up for? Right? Don't put your fucking hands down. Say something along the lines of, look, mate, I don't know you and you're making me nervous. Now, what is it you want? So now I'm actually feeding his ego. I'm actually telling him that I'm recognising he's potentially predatory and I really don't want none of it, which may allow me to de-escalate. But it will certainly calm his adrenaline because I'm telling him I don't fucking want none. Right? So from a tactical perspective, if he notices the fence and tells you to put your hands down, say, look, mate, I'm not being funny, but I don't know you. And you make me fucking nervous. Now, what do you want? As you try to move away. And if you could talk your way out of it from there, then situational control has worked for you. Because that's what it is. It's a non-physical option. But the first thing it will give you is momentary control of proxemics. Second thing it gives you is it acts as a sensory antenna. So if he tells me to put my hands down, he's telling me he wants to close the gap. If he steps forward and I'm forced to push him back, he's telling me he wants to close the gap. And if he slaps my hands down, he's telling me he wants this gap removed. In all cases, he's telling you, just as if he phoned you up and told you or wrote you an email, that he's about to become assaultive. Because the final precursor to violence is when he suddenly closes distance with the assault itself. And he wants this out of the way to do it. So a fence will protect you momentarily, but it doesn't last forever. You can't keep pushing the person back, pushing the person back. You can't keep, if he slaps the hands down, putting them back up, putting them back up. So we have what's called a two-touch rule. And the two-touch rule is never allow anyone to touch the fence, which is the lead hand, more than twice without taking action. So before my spiritual awakening, I was not a fucking people person. I'm quite impatient with people. So I used to have a one-touch rule. One touch. You touch this, and you don't fucking listen, now you're getting it. Right? But the idea is never allow somebody to keep touching the fence because now you've got to preempt. If he's coming forward, he's telling me I need to preempt. So it's a sensory tentacle that's telling you, act now. Take fucking heed of it. Do not go into denial. The third and final benefit of the fence is it's a rangefinder, which means if I can touch him from here, I can punch him in the fucking throat. I can touch him, I can hit him. It's a rangefinder. So it will protect proxemics, will act as a sensory antenna, and it will act as a rangefinder. If I can touch him, I can fucking nail him. Does that make sense? Final thing I'm going to say about this unobtrusive de-escalation position, non-violent posture or fence, call it whatever you will. Everyone in this business uses it. Everyone in this business gives it a name. So Terry O'Neill, who was a legendary karateka when I was a kid, said about Jeff Thompson's concept of the fence, fuck's sake, we've been doing that for years. We've been doing that for hundreds of years. And he replied, yeah, I know. But nobody ever taught it. Nobody ever conceptualised it or gave it a name and give it a structure to teach to somebody else, did they? And Terry went, no, you're right, fair one. And to be honest, the most simple thing that you could teach anyone is the fence and good verbal judo. That'll get the kind of person that's never really going to be able to fight as long as they've got a hole in their arse a chance of keeping somebody at bay so they can escape or de-escalate. But the fence is very, very fucking useful. Right? The concept of the fence belongs with Jeff. But I can tell you, I can show you texts that go back as far as 1710. So the Flowers of Battle. And this was a sword master that used to teach unarmed combat, how to use a dagger, what he called solar bastion, how to use a stick, and finally, how to use a sword. He was a swordsman from Italy, Fior de la Berry. And early drawings of his 1710 manual show this. That's what they show. So it's been around forever. We've always done it. Just understand it as a concept and a principle, then you'll be able to use it. Right? Finally, Kelly McCann used to call the 4 positions of preparation, so know them. If the person is in proximity to you say you're in an elevator and he's got in, he's not addressed you, but say he's leaning against the wall, he's looking you up and down, he's sucking his teeth or whatever, then clearly there's a potential problem. But I'm not going to stand here with my hands up, like I said, because he's not verbally addressed me. So if there's distance, I might keep my hands available. Right? Hands are available. So if he's like stood there or I'm leaning against something and his hands are down, if my hands are available across my groin and my pelvis, my hands are higher than his. That's the key. Always keep your hands higher than your adversaries. If he's somewhat closer, let's say half a foot, then this might change into this arms folded position, or as we talked about earlier, this hands available Jack Benny kind of position. So now I have a position of situational control that doesn't require me to verbally interact. So imagine you're stood in a queue with somebody, rather than have your back to them, turn to the side and just keep your hands available and watch them in your peripheral scope. So position 1 would be here, position 2 would be here, position 3 would be here. The 4th position would be a fence or a de-escalation position, which means now this guy's engaged me. So let's say he goes for me, what's your fucking problem? Now I'll go, mate, I ain't got no problem, what's this about? So again, in all times, my hands are available or higher than yours. Because the ideal would be that I'll preempt him from wherever my hands are. But understand, if I don't preempt and he hits me first, then the only thing that's going to allow me to equal the disparity of action over reaction will be if my hands are in a position where I could frame my head should I need to. So understand, when we deal with anyone in a proactive sense, we're working from this hands up position. My plan A is I preempt. But just as a plan B backup plan, if he was to launch at me from here, I could cover my head. And the only reason that I'm going to get to my head to cover it before he punches it is because if his hands are down and my hands are up, I'm already halfway through the shot to frame in my head. Does that make sense to you? Whereas if I'm stood here with fucking hands down and he goes first, he hits me as my hand comes halfway up and you're going to get hit. The only thing that's going to allow you to equal up or level the playing field between action and reaction is if your hands are already halfway there and you have an inclination that you could get hit. This is why we implement situational control or contact management using a fence. So the action of me putting up my hands is fine in an environment like this, because I'm clearly aware that my back's to a structure, he's the only person here, and as he addresses me, all I need to do is put up my hands. But if this was in the street or in a location where I wasn't totally aware of the environment, the action of me just putting up my hands as he approaches isn't enough. Because if I've unknowingly walked past his friend, who happens to be secreted from view, he approaches me and now I put up my hands, his friend could easily get behind me and I get pincered in the middle. Do you understand? So that's why we would always suggest that with using a position of non-violent posture or offence, you would implement the action of South Narc's contact management, which would mean as he approaches me, I would slip past him and make him reorientate to me as my hands come up. Now, if there was somebody previously behind me, they're now behind him, and I have them both in view and both in a line, which means if this gets dynamic, I can go one-on-one, one-on-one, much better than two-on-one with me in the middle.